From Nashville, Tennessee, Music City, USA, and the home of hot chicken, it's the Rick Altizer Show. Sit back, buckle up. Rick will talk with the movers, shakers, and creators who put Christ in Christian entertainment. He's a man who's clear so the world can hear. Here's Rick Altizer.
Hey, thanks for joining me today. Okay, so I'm here at the Marriott Hotel in lovely Franklin, Tennessee. And I'm at a festival called ICVM. The Russ Taff movie is going to play later today, and it's up for an award. But here at the festival is a good friend of mine who's an amazing filmmaker who has some amazing projects I want you to know about. But we're going to kind of talk about filmmaking. We're going to talk about getting under the hood and looking at kind of what he does. But John Grooters is my guest today. John, thanks for being on the show.
You're so welcome. I love your setup. It's perfect.
I love it. This is great. Here in the hallway.
It's the hallway. It creates that buzz like we're in someplace important where there's a lot of activity. It's like we're on Times Square.
So you're hearing all this noise and people talking and laughing and glasses clinking. That's because we're sitting in a hallway with a bunch of people.
A bunch of geniuses.
Yes, that's right. If you have not seen the movie Tortured for Christ, oh my goodness, when this radio show is over, go to Amazon Prime and check this movie out. It is amazing. It's so well done. Can you tell me a little bit about Tortured for Christ, how it came about, and kind of your involvement on that?
Yeah, it's been an amazing privilege, Rick, to get the privilege to do this film. Richard Wurmbrand wrote a book in 1967 by that name, Tortured for Christ. Richard and his wife Sabina had lived in the country of Romania, and he was a Christian pastor there. And when communism entered the country of Romania at the tail of World War II, the communists took over the whole country. They infiltrated the business, the government, the church, and many, many people were thrown into prisons and concentration camps and just outright killed. And they were spying on each other, and so it was illegal to hold really any kind of Christian meeting. Richard was arrested and ended up spending 14 years in these communist prisons in his own country. And to be in prison under communism is not just to serve time like it might be for us today. It's to be, quote unquote, re-educated. And that involves torture. And so brutal, physical, inhumane, barbaristic, animal-like cruelty that you wouldn't believe humans could exercise on other human beings. But under communism, this happened. His wife Sabina was also arrested. She spent only like 3 years in hard labor concentration camps. So a lot of people went through this. Many, many died, of course. Stalin, we know Stalin killed 5 times as many as Hitler. And this is the fingers of Stalin and Russian communism. But Richard's story, he certainly had every opportunity to die multiple times in prison. 3 years in isolation, 2 years in room 4 tuberculosis ward, where they only sent people who had less than 2 weeks to live. And Wurmbrand survives for 2 years. But what's amazing about his story is he loved his enemies. I mean, he loved on his torturers. He shared the gospel with people that just beat him harder for sharing it. And it kind of blows your mind because it makes no human sense that Christ could change us so much, that we would be so radically different as people, that we would have so much love in our heart that we could actually love people. Because he forgave us, we could be people of forgiveness. And so Wurmbrand got out of that experience, was ransomed by a foreign mission group, got out of the country so he wouldn't just be rearrested. And over a course of just 3 days in longhand, he writes this little book in 1967. But at the time, nobody had written a book who had survived communist prisons. I mean, it didn't exist.
Because you didn't survive.
You didn't survive.
There weren't any survivors.
Brain dead. Wurmbrand was uniquely gifted as a human being. I mean, he was already a cut above most. He was really smart. He spoke 14 languages, had a photographic memory. He was just gifted. But then God grabbed him in his life with such conviction. He was just sold out, and as was his wife Sabina. So his book comes out in the 60s. It's a bestseller. And it was a bestseller around the United States. It was banned in the Iron Curtain. You were not allowed to read Tortured for Christ in Romania in the 1980s. You would go to jail if you were caught with this book. But the book was a powerful, powerful stream of conscious testimony of what was going on. He wrote many other books after that, and he would call his other books superior from a literary perspective. But this is this raw, fresh regurgitation written with pen and tears, says his wife. So to commemorate the 50th anniversary of that book, the organization that he founded, which is called The Voice of the Martyrs, which is a powerful ministry in existence today, and it's in ministry all over the world, reaching out to support and remember the persecuted church. His organization thought this would be the time to take this book and put it to the screen to commemorate the 50th. And so that's what happened, and we were picked to be the production entity. I was hired to write the screenplay, direct the film, and so we started the process of how do we take this amazing story and try to convey its authenticity and its power in some way on the screen, and off we went.
So you're listening to the Rick Altizer Show on Bot Radio. My guest today is John Grooters. And if you notice, one of his gifts is storytelling. He did a wonderful job setting that up. John, you did a great job setting that up. And you just told this amazing story. I'm already, just the way you were just describing it and telling it, I'm enthralled, and you've got me in, and I'm in. And so let's talk about that then, because you have that gift. I mean, you just the way you communicated that, you have a vision of telling a story that makes it compelling and draws somebody in, that makes them want to know more. And so then you're taking this gift now as a writer, as a director, trying to take this amazingly huge story and then put it on the screen. So let's talk about, first off, some of your, tell me some of your steps of the creative process of getting it from, because I think you did more than just write and direct. Didn't you do like a whole lot of other stuff? You're kind of...
Well, I edit. I mean, an extension for me of writing is editing. So I've recently been listening to George Lucas's autobiography, and I was kind of thrilled to find out that Lucas also is an editor, and he feels, he was obviously before me and has done a little more successful projects, but I resonate with that in the editing room. I'm still creating the rhythm and the vibe of the story. So I like to be a writer, I like to be a director, and I like to kind of do an edit. And to me, that's a great privilege if you are ever allowed to do all those three, because you can create the pace and that you can make the choices from the page to the performance, then to the revelation. Anyway, those are my things. I don't do some of the other things that other directors do, but I do those things.
Well, tell me your steps. Tell me your creative steps of Voice of the Martyrs. The company contacts you and they say, hey, we want to make a movie of this book, and we want you to make it. Yeah. So then tell me how it went from there.
Great. This is great fun for me to talk about. It all starts with the script. So I worked with Steve Cleary, and Steve had known Richard and Sabina personally, and he was on the Voice of the Martyrs team. He had a starting point, a very vivid starting point in his mind, and he sent me 8 pages of kind of where he kind of wanted this thing to start and a couple scenes he wanted to have in it. So I had that. I had the book. I had his other writings. So, any writer, I start by reading everything, highlighting everything, creating notes. I'm a big advocate of story structure. So when I'm creating a screenplay, I don't just start writing and see where it goes. I put a 40-act beat sheet on my board, and I start writing note cards, 5x7 note cards. And if I think of a quote or a funny idea or a powerful idea, I write it down. And then I start laying it where I think the first act, the second act, the midpoint break is, the third act.
So you're just doing titles at this stage.
Yeah,
you're kind of titling and with a few little lines.
It's like a beat sheet, yeah. It's like we're taking the story. We've kind of done a 15-point beat sheet, and now
what's a beat sheet? Tell me, my listeners, help us understand what a beat sheet is.
There's a lot of different screenwriting books, and there's a lot of different methods, and I can't do all of them, but I kind of like Blake Snyder's beat sheet, which kind of forces me to make sure I've got a first act, a second act, a midpoint, a third act. And I don't want to get stuck in a lot of exposition. I want to make sure that every act has conflict, every scene has conflict, and that the movie has an actual story progression. And this is like the story writing 101, right? But I actually like to do it because if I don't, I can start to meander. Mm-hmm. So I put together a screenplay, but before I write the screenplay, it's going to be in structure on my board next to my desk. So that's my process. And I get that structure, and then I get the screenplay. It's usually a little bit too long.
Right.
It should be too long at first. But because we're working on real budgets, it's really imperative. I don't have enough money to be discovering ideas once we start shooting. That's expensive. It takes time.
Well, we're in a prison in where was it? What?
Romania.
Romania. We're in a prison in Romania, so I mean that's not a cheap movie to shoot right there. In the first point.
What was really fun was we finished the script, and then now we begin to discover how we're going to produce the script. Where do we shoot this? We go to L.A. Is there a backlot in the state of Washington? There's film incentives in Canada, Georgia. I mean, I didn't have a preconception, but Wurmbrand's story took place in Romania, a country I had never been, and I've been to 48 countries, so it's not like I haven't traveled. I've never been to this country. Don't have any connections, friends, reliable. But Judy, my wife, we work together, so she's a producer, and so she kicks in and she starts working the phones at night to start making phone calls to see if we might find a partner in Romania, because you're going to have to work with a fixer or a production associate, someone who speaks the language. Mm-hmm. She's so good at this, and she's done this in so many countries. And she nailed it again. And so I had a meeting one day to meet the two that she was going to recommend as our production partners. And I was thinking, okay, it's 7 hours ahead their time, and I'm making this phone call at 5 p.m., my time. And it occurs to me, oh my goodness, it's midnight or whatever it was, 1 a.m. So on the Skype call, there they show up. There's these two guys, two Romanian guys, Ionut and Andre. And right away, I'm very considerate. I'm like, guys, I'm really sorry. It's so late your time. I'll make this brief. Like, I just wanted to Stop it, John. We will stay up all nights for you. Do not make this brief. This is what we do. If you make it brief, we will just call you back. And right away, these guys had such an enthusiasm for the project. And I learned Ionut, one of now my dear friends, and who was a Romanian production partner, he told me the story of remembering his father had a copy of this book when he was a boy and would read it to him, knowing that if he got caught with this, he would go to prison.
Wow.
And now Ionut wanted to find out what this man, Richard Wurmbrand, was all about. And we knew right away we'd found the right partners. So we flew to Romania. And again, new countries, I'm always a little squeamish on the first trip. You just don't know. And again, we travel all the time, so we're not. But man, we're met at the airport. I'm thrown into a van, and they take me to our first scouting location. We traipse through the forest. Some guy's there from the army to unlock a lock on this old door, and there's this abandoned place, a place called Mogashaya was where it was. I mean, I walked into this place, and it took about 11 seconds to go, oh my goodness, this film is happening here.
Right here. This is my prison.
And, well, one of three prisons, as it turned out.
Oh,
we visited three different ones. We visited a prison called Jilava, where we filmed much of the movie, where Richard was actually held. These are the cells. These are the isolation chambers. So much evil took place for 40 years in this Jilava prison, and it still stands. And to get into it, it's actually still a working prison on the other side of the property. The Jilava part is not inhabited anymore. But that means you've got to check in to a prison to scout the location or to shoot the scenes, which means your cell phones come out. Every single piece of gear had better have its registration and numbers on file, because they don't want to think you're sneaking anything into the prisoners. So it's a little weird. You're going into prison. You're going through the barbed wire. You've given up your passport. You've given up your cell phone. And part of you goes, what if they decided not to let us out? I would really be method acting at that point. But I'll tell you, Rick, Tortured for Christ ended up, we filmed it in the locations and in the country where it originally happened. And not only did the locations become powerful, but now the crew, the cast, the wardrobe, it's all authentic.
And you're working with Romanian actors.
We worked with Romanian actors. The movie's in multiple languages, so sometimes there's subtitles, sometimes there's not. Some of my actors spoke English, some didn't. Sometimes Richard spoke these many languages, so sometimes he's speaking Russian. So there's Russian, there's Romanian, there's English. It's a blend, but I hoped to create a thing where the viewer never quite notices. They're just caught into the story.
Oh, yeah.
And you don't know
well made.
What language you're listening to. But the thing that I love about it, and you can't always do this, but it felt so authentic, because even if they were speaking English, the Romanian accent was not an actor pretending to sound. These were Romanian actors. And to me, that just gave the whole thing a vibe of authenticity that I really am happy with.
Well, I thought it was the best, I would just say of the decade, probably the best Christian movie I've seen as far as just the way it's made, its filmmaking. Then, you got Passion of the Christ, which obviously is a bar that's set so high. Yeah. It's so well done as far as its technical, the way that movie was put together, the cinematography, the light, it was just amazing. But I would put this, I think this is my opinion, the best made Christian movie that I've seen since then. I would say the best made movie of the decade. So let's talk about Tortured for Christ. The Voice of the Martyrs is funding this. It's a Christian movie that Christian families are going to see. So how do you decide as a director how to show torture? Because we've seen, Quentin Tarantino and these other guys who are ill, and they're showing violence in a way that is so unhealthy.
Yeah.
That's ill. There's an illness to it. It's like they're reveling in it.
Yes.
So how do you do that? How do you show in this movie? How did you make those decisions? Because I thought it was very well done. I thought it was, to me, it didn't come off as, that's overdone. I thought it was very appropriate what you did. But you have to. It's called Tortured for Christ. You've got to have some torture in it. So how did you tell me how you navigated that whole process?
Very intentionally. I mean, that was a very specific discussion. And, when you are, obviously, your client often defines these things for you. Every time you've worked for somebody or I work, sometimes the decision is not yours. Well, Steve clearly said to me from the beginning, John, we don't have to be squeamish about this. But I also know, you're right, we're going to show this in environments where we do not need to push gratuitous violence. And I'll also admit to you, so we thought very intentionally about this, and Richard's book is full. I could have picked of hundreds of horrible things that happened to him. So the first thing I had to pick was what were the specific things that I thought would communicate the barbaric cruelty quickly, visually, and didn't go too far. But what I also found was it's tempting, Rick. Once you've got I understand how Quentin Tarantino, who you mentioned, you sort of can get drunk with power because I really had to be careful about that. Because you start to think, we could do this and we could do that. So this was a prayerful thing. And how do you, in order to respect the depth of what it means to forgive your enemies, there is something that you've got to see the barbaric cruelty of those enemies. So one of the first ones I wanted to do, Richard this was actually a mild torture for him. But they had a thing called the carcer. We get the word incarceration from the carcer. You can't find very many images of these anymore in the world, but I found one. They would create a little box about the size of a small closet. And if you looked at the guard wrong or he didn't like the way you put your eyes down, he could throw you in the carcer. And you would get in there, they would lock the door, and you had to stand up, and there wasn't room to move to the left or the right. You were in a small box. And nails, sharp nails, were driven through this box on all sides. So if you even swayed to the left or the right, you would just be punctured with these nails. So you're stuck standing at attention, and try to do that for half an hour. Mm-hmm. You black out. Try to do it for a night, the entire night, standing on your feet. I mean, it's horrible. Sometimes for days even. I mean, I really can't imagine. Now, that's a mild one as their tortures went, but visually it spoke very quickly. So we created a carcer box. I made it so that we could take the top off. I could shoot from the top down. So you could see, exactly 360 degrees around him, these sharp nails. And then we moved very close to the nail and how close it was to his eyes.
Oh, my goodness.
And I stepped in that prop. I stepped in it and closed the door to try to get... I did this a couple of times where I would try to all right, I need to identify... 15 seconds... Okay, I identified. Let me out. Don't get me stuck in here. It's hard for me to imagine how they would survive these things. So that was the first one we showed a carcer. So there was no blood on that particular scene. And yet... emotionally, I actually thought, that gave you a very quick idea of, this would suck.
And it's it's a picture of just how he's closed in, how he's locked in. It's a prison. It's a very visual representation of what's actually happening to him as well. So it serves as a great metaphor.
The metaphor is his physical freedom has been taken from him, but his spiritual freedom cannot be. And so the movie, in our act structure, it changes when his arrest comes and Richard changes and he matures. It's the irony of the story of Christ is that we are promised there will be suffering and we are promised we'll have joy. This is opposites.
Right.
And so the actor, wonderful actor named Emil Mondanak, he understood this. he understood that the more they were going to torture and beat on him, the greater his essence was going to grow in Christ. It's a great challenge for an actor because it's got to be subtle, and yet I loved how he did it, and I'm very excited about Emo and the work he did. Other scenes, we decided the most brutal scene in the movie, and there's a ramp. We decided not to perform it on Richard himself. Like our actor gets beaten, his feet get beaten, he's put in isolation, he's in the car, so he gets handled. But I decided to deflect the worst scene, and there was another prisoner, a pastor by the name of Florescu. And they took this guy Florescu and they hung him upside down and they beat him and they threw him in a cell, and they would release rats into his cell. So all night long the rats are nipping it. This is horrible stuff, but it ramps up to the point where he's now tied to the wall in the prison cell. And this is true. They bring in his son, his 12-year-old son, and with an iron pipe in front of Florescu, they kill the boy. That's the worst scene in the movie. There are people that won't watch the scene.
Right. My wife closed her eyes.
And I don't, again.
And I do think it's important that you have to communicate the darkness and how dark it was, because that makes the power of the forgiveness so much deeper.
It's exactly right. And Richard, who's narrating that, says, Florescu, he was never the same. Who could be? And it was important for me to say who could be, to think that if under torture, no matter who you are, you will break. You will give away the names. You will. I mean, this is the true story. Anybody who's been, in torture, I never have. So who am I to talk?
Yeah.
And we didn't want to sort of create this sort of false narrative that like the cross didn't hurt. It did hurt. The scourgings Jesus took were painful. To be tortured yourself, you feel the physical pain. In Florescu's case, we showed a man who didn't recover. So that contrasted to that, Richard, who didn't succumb to mental illness or just lose his mind. Anyway, the issue of torture was an important one. The movie is not a torture movie. It is a movie of hope and encouragement.
Yes.
You end up feeling the power of God, not the despair.
Yes. You're listening to the Rick Altizer Show on Bot Radio. My guest today, John Grooters, director, and we're talking about the movie that came out last year, Tortured for Christ. And again, I can't give you a higher recommendation for this movie. The acting was amazing. That's the director. The director makes good acting. So when you see bad acting in a movie, you go, wait a minute, I saw that guy and he was good in the other movie. That's because the director wasn't doing his job. But John, you did a great job on this, and so I can't recommend high enough people to see this movie. And you can you can watch it by going to Amazon Prime if you have that. You can also get information on it at torturedforchrist.com. And then if you want information on John, you can go to John Grooters, that's GROOTERS.com, and you can find out about the other movies he's done. He's an amazing filmmaker. And so you've also you're kind of doing a prequel of Richard and his wife, and that's been greenlighted. Is that a go? And you're going back to Romania?
Yeah, I'm so excited. This is really the first I've talked about it, Rick. And so when this movie finished, I thought, I love the story, but how did they become such amazing? The movie sort of opens, and they're these incredible saints, and most of us are not. And I thought it would be really nice to do a follow-up movie and go back to how they met. Who were they? Did they just grow up as, holy people? And the fact is they didn't. Richard and Sabina, when they met, were both atheists. They were hedonists. Their journey is an amazing story. They did not start off as super people. They started off as selfish people. And God gets a hold of Richard, and then he gets a hold of Sabina. So I'm just back from Romania, just on a scout trip, and I'll be going back again for some casting in a couple of weeks. We'll be shooting in the spring of 2020 a new movie called Richard and Sabina, Tortured for Christ. At least that's the title as of today.
The working title.
And I'm really excited because I think these two movies as a bookend will be a fun pair.
Oh, I can't wait! And that's so we can see that fall of next year.
I think it'll be out. Next fall. Yep.
Oh man, fantastic! Well, again, I encourage you to check out torturedforchrist.com. If you haven't seen the movie, it's really something that I think it's important. Like The Passion was important for people to see. I can't really think of another movie in the last 10 years that I would say, I think this is an important movie that you need to see. Of course, other than Russ Taff, I Still Believe.
Which I'm going to see today, by the way. I can't wait.
But seriously, though, if you had to pick one of the two, Tortured for Christ is the one. That is just an amazing movie from a technical standpoint. It's so well made. But what that movie is saying is so important. especially to us in this culture where we're getting persecuted. We're getting, it's not persecution yet, but it's pressure, but it wants to be persecution. So I think in our nation, in our culture, we need to be looking at this and looking at what are you willing to do for your faith? Are you willing to stand up for Christ? And how far are you willing to? So these are really deep topics that we need to address that John did a beautiful job of. So John, thanks for being on the show. Thank you so much. We're out of time. Can you believe it?
I love it. Thank you, Rick. You're a good friend. Appreciate it.
All right.
If there's a show you've missed, you can go to my website, rickaltizer.com, and catch up. Or you can listen to my podcast in iTunes or wherever you hear your podcasts. Just search for The Rick Altizer Show. Altizer is spelled Altizer. I want to thank you for listening. Hey, would you tell a friend about this show and share the love? Be sure to check us out again next week as we discuss how we communicate the gospel through media to our culture. Let's be clear so the world can hear. I'll talk to you next week. Thanks for listening.